Yes, I couldn't answer the poll questions because they don't let people or hosts do that. But I would have definitely done the Pac-Man because I always wondered what ghosts taste like. That just was so
Ooh,
cool.
good question.
Okay, so yes, Kevin Folta received his PhD in 1998 from the University of Illinois at Chicago. He is currently the Horticultural Science Department Chair of the University of Florida, Gainesville, where he researches plant molecular biology and genomics. I bet Forrest Valkai, last week's guest, would know what those things mean, but I don't. Kevin teaches a popular course in critical thinking about claims in agriculture and medicine and leads popular workshops in science communication. He's been recognized with several prestigious awards for research, communication, and public service, including the National Science Foundation's Career Award, and he hosts the weekly Talking Biotech podcast since 2015. Welcome to RFRX, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here. This is great. So, and one quick correction: I'm not chair of the department anymore. I gnawed my leg out of that trap a while ago.
Ah, okay. We have to update
Wow.
your bio.
Yeah, that's
Well
okay.
done.
Yeah, it was wonderful to serve others, but you do that for a while and you move on to the next thing. So here we are. Um, so uh, so Rob, what do you think? Do I just start or do I?
Yeah, I wanted to, before you start talking about it, I wanted to ask you what what got you interested in this? Why did you go into this as a career?
Well, I think I covered that a little bit in the talk in that I grew up in a house of science. And my father, my grandfather, they were both very much scientists, even though they didn't call themselves scientists. My grandfather was a jeweler who worked on watches. My dad was a radio engineer, and both of them implemented science in everything they did, and the scientific method in everything they did, even without formal training in it. And so it was very easy for me to, even as a little kid, to fall in love with the idea of testing how something works, taking things apart, rebuilding. My dad, anytime it was a car to work on or a job to go on, I'd go with. So it was all about learning new things. So
Very
it's
cool.
very natural for me.
Very cool. Okay, yeah, if you're ready, start your talk.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So as was mentioned, um, I'm a professor at the University of Florida. Excuse me for one quick second. I was listening. Sorry, and I inhaled a cup of coffee.
Oh, nice. It's always this is part of my usual day. If I'm on a Zoom meeting, I am drinking coffee now.
Yeah, and it never fails that it was like I did the thing where I laughed at the same time, so it's like in my sinuses, and so now they're going to be up all night. All right.
Oh no.
Um,
Okay,
Are
so I
you
have to
saying
know
we're
what
funny?
what were you laughing at? What was
We
funny?
made you laugh?
I don't know what it was. I did, you know what it was is so I told the group beforehand. I'm in some interesting home circumstance. There she is. I'm in some interesting home circumstances where I'm here with my daughter. Mom can't be here for a couple of reasons, um, and uh, so I'm watching her, and I made her a beautiful dinner so that she would stay quiet for this whole thing. And then she had taken the tray off and was rubbing it on her head. So now she has to get a shampoo and whatnot. But all good.
Amazing.
So I'll start out by saying I'm much more interested in your questions than I am in talking about this because food and farming and agriculture and genetic engineering, these are such hot topics that people have very honest questions and don't know who to trust to give them an answer. And so I would like to be that person. Um, I've been working in the public sector my entire career. I obviously do work with industry in different ways, mostly the Florida strawberry industry, but have worked with different industries in different ways, mostly because it's my job to understand what they're doing. And if I'm going to work with farmers and make recommendations, I need to know what the best and newest is from companies. I've had friends in all the companies. So it's one of these things that online, people have said, oh, but he's all connected to the industry, and nothing further from the truth. I know people there. I've worked with them. It's no big deal. But I've been an academic scientist my entire career, and I love that freedom. And that's why I do what I do. Um, there's really a lot more to that than just that. So I'm going to go ahead and put up my slideshow here for a second. Now we go to the talk. So as I was mentioning before, I was born in 1967, but I remember the landing on the moon, and it probably was. And this was
What? You remember the first one?
I
2 years,
totally
you were
do.
2 years old?
I was 2 years old. My dad sat with 2.5, and we sat on the couch. And on a black and white TV, he convinced me this was something I better remember.
Damn. I was 10 years old and can barely remember the time.
And it's probably one of my earliest memories. So I grew up in this house of science. And when my dad, we were watching Mr. Rogers, and he had a song that was, "You never can go down the drain." And he said, "You're bigger than the water." And I remember asking my dad that the water can be a glass of water or it can be the ocean. So what does he mean when you're bigger than the water? And he had this pocket protector full of pens and screwdrivers and other stuff that he would use in electronics. And he took a pen out, an old crusty 1970s pen, clicked the end and said, "There are more molecules and atoms in the tip of that pen, tiny little particles." And so we had these discussions about atoms and molecules when I was probably 4 or 5 years old. And I was so on fire about science, 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 science. I was really into dinosaurs. And when I went to kindergarten, I was so excited to go to kindergarten because I'd get to be in science fair. And I went to kindergarten and they said, it's only for fifth to eighth graders. So when you're 5 years old and you're not going to get to do the thing you really were passionate about doing for another 5 years, that's like a whole lifetime away. So you're like, forget it, I'm out. And they let me in as a kindergartner. That's me with the charismatic megafauna of the Cretaceous Tertiary boundary display.
I
And
swear,
then,
I think I had some of those exact dinosaurs from whatever kit that was from.
yeah,
It looks
those
so
were all
familiar.
the Aurora models. I remember though. I remember how they smelled and how you'd glue them together. And excuse me, I'm still suffering from inhaling a cup of coffee. And that's me on the first day of first grade with my sister who's going first day of kindergarten. And you can see I kind of had the professor thing kind of nailed down already. Uh, I had the pants and the bright idea and the big stack of books going to first day of first grade. So science is something I've always been in love with and really excited to share. And today, over the last whatever it's been, 50 years, I really fallen in love with the idea of how do we use science to benefit farmers because this is the basis of our food. And 1.5% of our population feeds the other 98.5%. And so I'm really interested in new tools for farming, whether they're genetics or whether they're AI or drones or whatever. How do we use technology to make more food safer and more economically with less environmental impact? Very engaged in dealing with the developing world. I've been in some of the places in Uganda and China, places with just tremendous food insecurity. And really, everything I do has that commitment that can we get technology to the people who need it elsewhere? And I really think that's an important part. I'm also very interested in the USA consumer, the industrialized world consumer, who makes bad food choices. And how can we use science to make food better, to make it more available, to make it accessible, to make it last longer? Those are things I really care about with respect to humans and also our environment. How do we farm with environmental sustainability? And the big challenge there is we have 9.7 billion people coming. Will be here in 2050. And how do we feed 9.7 billion people when we have to do it with fewer resources and a lot less land use? And so how are we going to do it? We have to intensify what we have. And how do we do that in a responsible and environmentally sensitive way? And so those are the things that when I think about projects, I think about ideas, I think about concepts in science. These are the four fundamental values that anchor what I do. And this is why I get excited about science, because I think that there are solutions for all these areas rather than threats to them, as many people will suggest. And my lab, we work on genomics of flavors and aromas and strawberries. We work on how light can influence the way things grow, plants grow. We also work on small molecules that might work as the next generation of very safe herbicides. And so we're working on a lot of different things. But uh, my main work is at the level of the molecule and molecular biology. And it makes me very excited about the things that we can do with it. And even as a kid, I was on fire about genetics and molecular biology and DNA science. And I was so surprised to hear that people were actually opposed to it. And so this has been something I've shifted in my life from how do we worry about molecules and DNA and plants and new products to how do we deal with the public perception? Because the human is much more complex and a much more formidable Rubik's Cube than the plant itself. And so I've become much more interested in the psychology and sociology of science denial and has many ties in with many of the concepts around religion and acceptance that folks talk about here. And I'm also fortunate to be married to a farmer. So we're at the farmers market every week. We do a lot of work on the farm. That's her before she had the baby, who's here now. And what's so cool about that is that I know what it's like to grow crops, and I know what it's like to deal with the different factors that are involved in that. And we are very active in our community. We're very active in producing food. We've got great customers. I was supposed to deliver eggs tonight. I had to call the guy that tell him I'll be by in a little bit with his eggs that actually cost less than the store, which is fantastic. And so when we talk about food and farming, you're not talking to somebody whose tractor is a pencil. I know what it's about and I do it, and I actually prefer it to the professor work these days. So I know where I'm coming from on both ends of the ivory tower egghead side, as well as the boots on the ground, hands in the dirt side. And in general, I think that what we've seen across agriculture in the last 10 years or 20 years is that technology has been just such a driver. And we see ways that we can grow in environments that we never grew in before, like indoor environments or even in space. We know that there are ways that we can make large crop production even more effective with tractors that drive themselves and are monitored from satellites and can look at your soil from satellites and tell you where things are dry or over fertilized. We also have drone technology that can, instead of spraying a field for a pest, the drone can identify where that pest is and go and spray that spot. So in terms of sustainability and use of chemistry, this is a major breakthrough.
How much is that being used, Kevin? Does
Um,
this explain the Christmas drone invasion in my state of New Jersey?
I don't think so. Even in the Garden State, I think you're not seeing this. I think this is something that is really being tested more than anything else. In the Netherlands, they're big on this technology because they have so many fields of ornamental crops that there is a lot of drone and crawler surveillance. So tractors on the ground, small tractors that sniff the air for the volatiles that are emitted from specific fungi. And when they're found, the drone comes in and sprays. Super, super
Wow.
cool stuff.
Sci-fi stuff.
And now we're looking at technology where someone in Seattle can operate on somebody in Florida. And that's reality and only growing. So we're really in love with a lot of these ideas around technology and the ways it can help solve the human condition or improve the human condition. The biggest breakthroughs are happening at the level of the gene itself. And whether we're talking about medicine or agriculture, there are breakthroughs that are happening every day in how we will administer medicine, how we'll predict disease, how we will change how crops grow and develop and resist disease. This is reality and it's upon us, and there's pushback at every level. People go for well, this isn't how it's supposed to be. This isn't how God intended. This isn't natural. And so this is what I've really dedicated my time to is how do we soften that interface between the technology that is so good and the people that fear it, and also the people who just don't know one way or the other and want to know more evidence. So, we'll hopefully answer all your questions about this later today. The thing is, this was the technology of the time. Getting out in the field and removing limbs with saws, maybe suffering from smallpox. This was the technology was you had what you had and you couldn't use anything else. And as time went on, we began to realize that there's other ways that we can solve these problems using major technologies. A lot of people stand in the way of that. And whether you're talking about vaccines or genetic engineering, there's a lot of people that are opposed to these technologies. And it's a very unfortunate thing because it clouds the conversation. It floods the zone with misinformation and doubt. And this leads to slower deployment of good solutions. So that's why I'm excited to talk to you today. Here's opportunities that we can use to communicate the good things that science can do to improve the lives of others. And really what's going on is, why is there a difference between what the public believes and what scientists know? And it goes back to Sagan's quote, I don't want to believe, I want to know. And where's that rift? And why are we losing that battle as scientists and as a scientific community to folks who believe what an influencer might say or what a website says, rather than what we actually know? And so we get into all the echelons of psychology and sociology, and where science and scientists have failed to communicate things effectively. And so let's start out by talking about what biotechnology really is and what's new in agriculture, and then its applications in medicine a little bit. I'm going to kind of leave that out today. And then we'll talk about some of the things that we see in the future. I'll talk about lots of examples from agriculture because those are really the hot topic. Now, going back to the beginning, and for many of you, this is review. DNA is the master blueprint. It's the hard drive of your cell. In all of the cells in your body, the trillions of cells in your body have DNA in the nucleus, and all of them are identical. That's the hard drive. It's the blueprint for you. And if you were to take a cell out of, say, her shoulder, there's your cell and a nucleus in there, and the nucleus contains 46 chromosomes, 23 from mom, 23 from dad. And if you were to unravel that chromosome, which has tremendous organization, don't try it. It would give you this very simple 4-base pair code that encodes everything about you. 4 different chemicals, that the order of those chemicals is what dictates all of the structures and enzymes and activities that go on to maintain your physiology and growth. It's an amazing system, and all encoded in the information in this molecule. And just to kind of, and I think let me move that over a little bit, sharing my screen, but I've got a little bit, let me do that. Okay. When we look at the cell, DNA is kind of like the hard drive. It's in the middle of it's in the center of your DNA. It's in the nucleus of your DNA or nucleus of your cell, put away. You never want it to come out. RNA is this intermediate. The RNA is like a USB drive. It's temporary. It contains a subset of the information on the hard drive. And then ultimately that goes to what would be the cell's printer, basically a producing proteins that are the structures and catalytic functions of the cell, the enzymes that drive metabolism, the enzymes that run physiology. That's all the output of the information on the hard drive that goes through this intermediate. So if we wanted to and this is how they describe it as the central dogma of molecular biology in fancy terms, DNA to RNA to protein. So if we want to change genetic engineering in a cell, we might put a new piece of information on the hard drive. If we want to use a COVID vaccine against a COVID virus, we might add the RNA from the virus for the spike protein for one part of the virus that then is translated into the protein product that induces the antigenic response. If we wanted to stop this process, we could delete something on DNA, or we could get rid of the RNA in a couple of ways. So there's a lot of ways that we have learned as biologists to manipulate this paradigm of going from DNA, the hard copy, to the transient copy, to the protein itself. And so that's kind of what we'll talk about today, is what changes can we make that are favorable, that help crop biology and help the human condition. All right, there's your DNA and the nucleus, RNA and the cytosol going out to do something, and then there's your printer, what they call the ribosome, which is what translates that information into the proteins that do the work around the cell. And so how can we change information if we wanted to go to a library? And I use this as an analogy because if the nucleus of a cell and DNA is a library of the genes that make you you, how do we change that information? Well, a couple of ways that we could do that. We could go put a new book on the shelf, add new information, right? You could just do like they do in Florida and just burn a book and get that information off the shelf.
Oh,
Or, yeah, well, here we are. Or you can, I didn't vote for them. So anyway, or you can go to a book of choice, and you might use a very surgical method to remove key words that would completely reverse the meaning of that text. So thou shalt covet thy neighbor's house, so it completely flips the meaning by removing a few letters. So this is the new technology. We can basically go into the library of your cell and remove a couple letters and reverse the meaning of that genetic instruction. Very powerful stuff. And that's what that I mentioned before, the SARS-CoV-2. This is a great example. We can use mRNA to introduce RNA in that intermediate step. Basically, adding RNA into the cell, not in the nucleus, but just through the outside, to give a new product that can confer immunity to that disease. Good stuff. And that's the spike protein that was produced. So what's going on with the beginning of this explosion of biotechnology? And we have to step out of plants a little bit and talk about some of the ways we've had great innovations that were not plant-based. So let's talk about the biggest one first. And if you look at number of diabetics in the United States, it's a huge number. And when you look at it's almost 50 million people are dependent upon shots of insulin. And insulin is a recombinant DNA molecule. This is something that comes from genetic engineering and biotech. And it didn't always. Years ago, that's a pile of 10,000 pounds of pancreases. And that would give you 1 pound of concentrated insulin. So you would have a guy in a Pee Wee Herman outfit who would go through this department of Eli Lilly here, Eli Lilly would take those pancreases out of the pile and make human insulin.
where did the pancreases come from?
Oh, slaughterhouses. Yeah, so out of the slaughterhouses, they would go pull the pancreases out of the gut piles and save those to make bovine or cow or pig insulin. And the problem is that you could have other types of immune reactions because the purity wasn't 100%, and always something else would travel along with it. So around 1977, when gene splicing became favorable, people said, well, what if we could use genetic engineering and make 100% human insulin? And all we need to do is take the gene from human beings and put it in bacteria and grow a big vat full of bacteria, let them make the human insulin, and then we pull that out and purify 100% human insulin. And that's what they did.
Was there not pushback on that? I could see that. Sounds like Frankenstein, very not natural.
But back then there wasn't much pushback. This was actually technology that was widely embraced, and wasn't barely even a thing. this flew through regulation. And here you have this little human biosynthetic rDNA origin. So R means recombinant DNA origin. This was made from recombinant DNA. And that's humulin R. That's human insulin that was not made in a human, that can be used in a human, and offers all kinds of benefits over taking it out of cows and pigs and big piles of gut piles or big piles of pancreases, right? And that's why hot dogs are cheap.
Are hot dogs made out of
Oh,
pancreases?
please, no, don't tell me that.
It's a joke. Okay. So
Told you, subtlety eludes me.
that's all right. Yeah, it's a so what's the deal with this biotech stuff and how do we do it? How do we genetically engineer something? And the reason it works is because all of the organisms on the earth in general, I think every organism on the earth, we all share the same fundamental molecules for a genetic code. Those letters, the A's, G's, C's, and T's, are the same in bacteria and humans. So that's why we can take a human gene and have bacteria make the product from it. And it's because we all share a common code. And so when we start to look at ways of doing it, how do we move DNA from one place to another? And in plants, which is my specialty, we've all done this before where you take a cutting, and if you take a cutting and you put it in water, all those cells at the end of that stem now think that they're roots, or they elongate roots from cells that had previously decided to be stems. And this is the process that we exploit when we make genetically engineered plants, is that if we can get our DNA into one cell and convince that cell to become a whole new plant through this process of redifferentiation, then that's how we can generate a plant that contains 100% all the DNA, the gene that we wanted to have. Pretty cool stuff. And it's old business at this time. Back in the 40s and 50s, they used carrot cells that you could regenerate a whole new carrot from one cell. So you take one cell and then put it in the right conditions. It makes 4 cells, it makes 8 cells, it makes 16 cells, and eventually makes a little carrot embryo that grows into a whole new carrot plant. And so if we could go in the laboratory and put our genetic information on the hard drive of one cell, we now can grow an entire organism that contains that genetic information. Pretty easy. And it's something that if you came to my lab, I could have you doing in a couple weeks. No problem. I could have you do it overnight if you wanted to do it in bacteria.
So is the result of that, is that a clone?
It is the original, it's a clone of the original cell plus the information you put in. So if we were to put information into this one little cell here, then it would be a clone of this plant plus that one thing we installed. So that's why this is such powerful stuff. We don't need to rebreed the Gala apple. We can have a Gala apple with one new piece of information on its hard drive. And so that's why this is such a cool technology. And that's kind of what it looks like. We start with a little segment of stem, and eventually that turns into a little blob of stuff called callus. It turns into a generic cell type. And then on the right media with the right combinations of hormones and the right amount of sugar, the right amount of salt, it'll make whole new plants from that little blob of cells. And then those whole new plants can be grown in a petri dish, but then rooted in soil. And then there you have that new plant. So if you can get in one cell here, you can end up with a plant that is completely new, carrying that one gene, everything else the same. And that's why this is such cool technology. So how do you do it? According to the internet, this is how you do it. You get a big syringe full of stuff, put on your mask and start shooting it in. Nothing further from the truth. It's actually done by this. And this is a bacteria called Agrobacterium tumefaciens. And agrobacterium makes these galls on cells. And the reason it works is because it invades a plant and it injects a little piece of DNA into the plant cell to kind of take over the plant cell. And so what scientists did was they disabled the bacterium from infecting the plant with its information to infecting the plant with our information. So we tell the bacterium what to put in the cell, it goes and puts it in the cell. It's a remarkable process. I glossed over. I could teach it for a semester. But the idea is the bacterium does the work. It puts the gene into the cell, and then we grow the plant from that cell. And that whole process, so we put our favorite gene in here, we get a whole new plant containing that gene. And so what do we do? What would be our goal? You know, if we go back to one of my first slides, when we talk about farmers and consumers and the food insecure and environment, if we wanted to do genetic engineering to satisfy our values, what would we do first? And the best idea might be crops that defend themselves. What if you can make crops that fight back against pests without having insecticides applied? And this is a brilliant idea because farmers are applying lots of insecticide in order to knock down insect populations. It's very safe compared to where it was in the DDT days. The things we use these days are very targeted, yet people don't like residues, and any number that is not zero is unacceptable to many consumers. You can say you have 5 parts per billion, and they'll say that's 5 parts per billion too many, even though it represents 5 seconds and 31.7 years. They want zero. So how do we do that? Well, one way we can do that is by genetically engineering in a natural insect control. And this is Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a bacterium that is pretty much ubiquitous. You eat a lot of it every day, whether you know it or not, because unless you have sterile food, it's coming in on fruits and vegetables. And it kills bugs that chew on it. Bugs that eat this bacterium die. And so they sell it in the store as something called BT for Bacillus thuringiensis. It is a key strategy in organic farming because it's natural. So you can spray the fungal spores on your plants and it'll protect them from caterpillars or any kind of larval insects. Works great. And the way it works is that if you consume the bacteria, you die. So scientists said, what if we take the protein that's dangerous, take the DNA from it, dangerous to the insect, take the DNA out, put that into the plant, and now when an insect comes along and eats on the plant, it dies. And that's the strategy that was used, and it's fantastic. The way it works is that it's cut insecticide use tremendously. And this is kind of old data at this point, 2011, but insecticide use on BT corn in terms of kilograms per acre or hectare has gone from X amount of kilograms per hectare, which even this number is pretty low, 0.2 kilograms per acre is pretty low, but has gone down to almost nothing. And in many cases is zero. What you're seeing here is an average of a little bit that's coming from things that aren't controlled by BT. The amount of insecticide per acre has gone down so much because of genetic engineering. And so people will say, I don't want genetic engineering because it's all about pesticides. It gets rid of pesticides. And farmers love it because this costs money to apply. And so to not have to buy the product and apply it and spend the fuel and spend the time is awesome. And so they buy genetically engineered seeds. And the way this looks in the field, this is a genetically engineered BT corn. This is one without it. And you can see the damage from earworms. There are worms that the moths lay their eggs on the silks, and then the worms go in and eat the corn. And I sell with a lot of organic farmers, and organic farmers will sell you half a ear of corn because this half is all damaged. And their organic pest controls are good, but not great. So you get a lot of corn that looks like this. So they cut that off. And the corn at my farmer's market looks like this. It's fantastic. And same technology is used in eggplants. So in Bangladesh, not in the US, in Bangladesh, eggplants is a very important crop. And they have worms called the fruit and shoot borer. It's the larval form of a beetle that is laid in the eggplant. And it will lay a trail of what they call frass, which is the feces of the larvae and destroy the fruit. And these are farmers that maybe have a couple acres of eggplants. So they use heavy duty insecticide sprays. They use the old stuff that we're not allowed to use anymore because it's not regulated in Bangladesh. They spray without proper PPE. A lot of it's done by children. And so to have the BT eggplant means they don't have to spray anymore. It takes on and destroys this insect. And farmers in Bangladesh are tremendously thrilled with this. It went from 2 farmers in 2014 to 20 the next year to now millions of farmers are using it. And it's even being smuggled into other countries because it's so successful. It really has revolutionized farming for many families. And I would encourage you to look at a couple of the movies that have made about this. One is called Well Fed by a guy named Hidde Boisma. He's a filmmaker from the Netherlands. But if you look up BT Eggplant movie, there's a number of them that have been made, and they just show the progress. Also, Food Evolution, which is a movie by Scott Kennedy, who recently did Shot in the Arm about vaccines. Scott also shows a lot about eggplants.
So when you say it was smuggled into other countries, is this
Yeah.
because it was outlawed in those countries?
Yeah. So India was the first country. This was made for India. And India, they approved it all the way up to the top, and the prime minister, I guess, said no. So all of their parliament and everything else said this was fine. At the very top, they declined it, and farmers wanted it. So they, the ag minister of Bangladesh, who is an older woman, she stands about 4'6", tiny little woman. She said, I want this for my people and my environment, and we are going to use the technology. And she was awesome. She decided she was going to use this, and she introduced it back in 2014. It's been there 10 years now. But now farmers are coming to Bangladesh to get seeds to smuggle into India. So this thing is being grown everywhere now.
So is not the success of this in that one country like causing the other governments to, reconsider banning it?
Not so much. These are not decisions that are made on science or on farming success. These are decisions where a few handfuls of politicians are swayed by activists, and even the Western activist groups like your Greenpeace and others are very active in these countries and are really stirring the pot to make noise, warning people: if you eat this, you will get cancer. If you eat this, you will have other problems. In Africa, they will say, if you eat this, it will make you homosexual. Where there's still like
Oh my
homophobia,
God.
where homophobia is rampant. They will use that as they find out whatever. In China, they say, if you eat this, you will not be able to have children. So they find out what the issues are in those individual countries, and then they play into those. And those are Western activist groups, Western
So
NGOs,
why are they doing this, Kevin? What
because
is their motivation for doing this? Why?
it's great for the bottom line. It's a way for them to continue to bring in money, and that's all it's about. They know they're fighting an uphill battle, and that's why so many folks have quit places like Patrick Moore. Like him or not, he was one of those guys putting himself on a Zodiac inflatable boat between whales and Japanese harpoon ships. I mean, this guy was risking his life to save those whales, but he quit Greenpeace because they started getting in the way of the humanitarian mission that they said they were there for, by blocking technology that allowed technology to get to people in need. And so this is just the changing face of NGOs, and they stand by, they dig in their heels, and they don't realize what heroes they would be if they said, we're wrong, let's do it. So,
So
uh,
what
so
are the risks? Are there risks associated with this? What is the thing that's making these groups so concerned that this is going to cause problems. You mentioned them bringing up various different anxieties that might be pertinent to the different cultures they're talking to, but what do you think is the reason that they think these are harmful?
I think a lot of it falls back on the idea that folks have an aversion to multinational companies in the US controlling the distribution of seeds. And I get that, that they're displacing native varieties, which, India is the center of origin of eggplants. There's such diversity in eggplants, from like white ones and orange ones and all kinds of flavors and colors. And by bringing in a big purple crazy thing from St. Louis, Missouri, do you risk the native biodiversity? And that argument's made in a lot of places, and I understand that. That's one. The rest of it is that they just don't like big companies being in charge of seed. These are very expensive seeds, relatively speaking, because at least they were in general. The brinjal, not so much. This was given away and is freely distributed. But people are nervous about things like cotton. In India, cotton, you had to purchase the genetically engineered seeds. No genetically engineered food crop has been approved there, but cotton was. And it's very expensive. And people would plant it and then have no monsoonal rains because they don't have irrigation. Cotton crop would fail and they'd be in tremendous debt. So there's been all kinds of concerns around those areas.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's almost the way you're seeing it is kind of like these outside groups are coming into these places and telling these other locations, hey, don't use these solutions. We think they may have these kind of vague problems associated with them without recognizing the actual current benefits that they're bringing right that minute to the local farmers who are now not spraying their children with pesticides, essentially.
And that's exactly correct. I think it's this it's groups in the US and Europe who say we don't believe that multinational corporations like Bayer or Syngenta should be selling seeds to small farmers in Africa or Uganda. And yet African and Ugandan farmers will say, I got to feed my kids. I want to do more of I don't want to have to spray chemistry. I can't have a crop fail. So I want the technology. So the organizations and their influencers make up false information about how this is dangerous, or how it's going to hurt you, or how it's going to hurt your kids, or you won't be able to have kids. So all this information is really about the concerns of folks in the first world or in developing in the industrialized world who are expressing concerns for those in the developing world,
rather than letting people in the developing world say what their actual concerns are.
Yeah, I mean, probably one of the most heartbreaking days of in my life as a scientist was, and we'll talk about it maybe in a second, is I stood in a field in Uganda of matoke. Matoke is the banana that they use in Uganda, and it's a starchy banana like a plantain. That's the basis of every meal. So it's like the rice or the noodles. It's the base of the meal that you put something on top. And people there would say, if you don't have matoke, you don't have dinner. And matoke is grown like a banana tree. And there's two problems. One is that it's sensitive to a bacterial wilt. And they used a gene from green pepper in matoke banana to stop the disease. And then also vitamin A deficiency is a problem there. And Ugandan scientists, a woman scientist named Priver Nemanja, she's brilliant. She put the genes for the precursors of vitamin A in the matoke banana. And I remember, this is in 2017, this is 8 years ago now, standing behind a barbed wire fence with an armed guard where you had to sign in and show ID to stand amongst the trees that this woman made, a Ugandan woman made for Ugandan farmers. And the controls are all dead, but the trees that are experimental are alive and full of bananas. And she's sharing with me her frustrations that her country doesn't even have a mechanism to deregulate this to get to farmers. And when you listen to the radio, it's in English with Greenpeace and also in Lugando, the local language, saying this will be poison and you will get cancer and you will. They fight this stuff tooth and nail every time it comes up in Parliament. And in 2017, I was there to work with the Minister of Agriculture. We got it passed through Parliament, but then the president vetoed it because the president's wife doesn't like genetic engineering. So I've had a lot of very personal experiences with seeing what's on both sides of that barbed wire fence. People and farmers in need on one side and a solution on the other. And how do you connect them? And this is how we do it. We talk about it. We share these ideas. We share these stories, and we point out this horrible inequity and this this travesty that exists. And hopefully, by talking about this, we can maybe help solve that problem. But this ties in with that. Vitamin A deficiency is a huge problem in the world, mostly in the developing world, and it's really bad in Africa, but also in Asia, some in South America. And what vitamin A deficiency does is it leads to a deterioration of vision, eventually a loss of vision, eventually a breakdown of the immune system, and usually death from diarrheal diseases. And we have no idea how many people this affects because it's not something that is easily quantified, especially in a back village in Yemen. You can't get health teams in there to study the people that are there. Huge problem. This is night blindness, vitamin A deficiency, and all kinds of bad effects of vitamin A deficiency, especially in children. And there are ways to get around that. And the number one way to do it is you consume things that are high in beta carotene. Beta carotene is the orange stuff in carrots that breaks down by the body into vitamin A. And so your leafy greens, your carrots, all that stuff, really big in vitamin A. The problem is that most of these countries don't consume these things. And their food staples like matoke, like rice, potatoes, cassava, corn, wheat, all of these are very low in vitamin A. And these are the basis of the meal. And in places with food insecurity, this might be all you get. So the idea came, what if we were able to take the gene out of here, put it in here, take the gene from that causes the accumulation of the orange pigments into food staples. And they did this. They were able to take the gene from, it actually was from daffodil and a bacterial gene to make beta carotene in rice. And so here's what they called golden rice. First developed in 1997, so going on its 30-year anniversary, and it has not yet been deployed anywhere. It was approved in the Philippines in 2021, and they were going to do this, and it was being grown in 2023, 2024, and then the government, thanks to Greenpeace, came in and put in an injunction to stop the growth and not allow the sale. And so you had the solution here that could help childhood blindness and kids surviving arrested in its tracks.
I remember seeing a documentary where I think it was Greenpeace. Where people went in, activists, and like torched crops and stuff that were being.
Yeah, that was real common with golden rice. It was actually Greenpeace and Western NGOs that hired people to pretend they were farmers and go in and trash fields. And one guy who used to be a good field trasher, his name is Mark Linus, Lynas. You can follow Mark Linus online. He has since, well, he flipped in probably 2012, 2013 and said, I'm wrong. He was a climate scientist who said, here I am saying we need to study the evidence of climate science, but yet I'm denying the science of genetic engineering. And Linus was, he's a great guy, and he really has shed a lot of light on the disinformation. But he was somebody who was pulling the crops out of the fields. He was stopping the trials. These were actually trials and actually grown crops that were arrested in the last year. So very sad time. I don't know where that sits at the moment. The other thing you can do, and this kind of ties in with conservation, is we know that fish is a good source of protein, especially in early development. And salmon, you can overfish them. And in many places, they were taking a toll on native populations. So farm salmon was there, but farm salmon has its drawbacks in that the salmon are you get a lot of disease. You have to feed them. You have a lot of other issues with farm salmon. So what if you could get one that could grow in an inland tank in half the time? And this was the idea that you could get, this is how they do it now. You have these extensive farms outside, big netted farms, and the fish live inside those nets, and then they're farmed that way. But we also have seen a decline in certain fish, in salmon, in certain areas, where there's a decline in natural populations, which makes fishing harder and also has ecological impacts. So what if we could change something? So salmon grow sometime of the year and they take the winter off. And they grow in the summer and they slow in the winter and grow in the summer. What if we could just make that even? And what if you could do that by taking the growth hormone that's expressed at these peaks and express it all the time? And what they've done is exactly that. By using a gene from salmon for growth hormone, turned on all the time. And so you have something called the Aqua Advantage salmon. And the Aqua Advantage salmon reaches market size, which is right about here. It reaches market size about 1.5 years versus about 2.5 for standard salmon. And that means this gap is where you're not feeding and medicating and dealing with waste and all the other issues that farm salmon create. So this idea was a really good one. If anyone wants to take a stab, I should have asked when the first genetically engineered fish was created. It was in 1989. So 1989, the first one was made. It just came onto the market a couple of years ago, and it's only sold in food service. These two fish are the same age.
Wow. So was there any difference in the pushback on doing this sort of thing to plants versus to animals?
Oh, huge pushback and huge regulatory differences. So this salmon is regulated like a drug, even though it just has a single gene turned on all the time versus seasonally. It had to go through all the same exact trials that a new drug would go through, because that's how animal genetic engineering is regulated. It's horrible. If you change one letter out of the 3.6 billion bases in a cow, it's now a drug. And so this is why we have such an archaic system. This eventually did get approved. It sat on President Obama's desk for about 5 years. Eventually did get approved. And so you could actually, this is a lowering costs for salmon in restaurants, things like that. But there's pushback against that. There's quite a bit of pushback. It's all grown in inland tanks in Indiana. So if a fish were to escape, first they're what they call triploid. They have 3 sets of chromosomes, so they're sterile. And if it did escape, it's a long flop to the ocean. There's not a issue of this being a threat to natural populations. And they make a beautiful large fish. So this is another nice example of how genetic engineering is influencing the availability of food. The other one that's interesting was done by this J.R. Simplot company, where they work with potatoes. And anytime you fry potatoes, wheat, anything with wheat or potatoes, you create a compound called acrylamide. And acrylamide is a neurotoxin. It's a cancer cause. It's a carcinogen, very low in amount, but a risk. And so to decrease the risk, the company made a way to decrease the acrylamide, which is this chemical here, in cooked products. And the way they do that is it's using a gene that decreases the amount of a specific amino acid in the potato tuber so that you have less acrylamide forming. And that whole thing they thought would be brilliant, that people would love it. Went over like a lead balloon. People don't really get too upset about it. They love their French fries and toast. But it was a way of blocking this compound called asparagine, from existing. So you made less acrylamide. Another great example of an approved genetic engineering change that didn't get great public fanfare. Yeah. So that was just disrupted that pathway. And healthier toast. A couple more that I'll show you really quick, just to kind of bang through a few. Going back into the 1980s, papayas, very important culturally in Hawaii. There was a disease called papaya ring spot virus that was spreading throughout the Hawaiian Islands. And it looks like this. It makes unsaleable fruit and decline in the trees. And a guy named Dennis Gonsalves, who was from Hawaii, grew up on Kauai, but he's works with USDA and in conjunction with Cornell University, used the method called RNAi suppression. So he was able to destroy the thumb drive of the cell. So the RNA being a single-stranded molecule, could you put a backwards version of that RNA in the plant and have it cancel out the cell's thumb drive? And that's exactly what he did. And what's cool is both of these trees are infected. This one does not have the genetic engineering tweak. This one does. And in this field here, here's trees that are genetically engineered surrounded by those that aren't. It works so well. And so just being able to turn off that virus, and these are still working great today. This was in the 1990s, before there was crazy pushback against genetic engineering. And so we didn't have a whole lot of pushback on this. And this one worked great and is still in use today. And when they tried to outlaw genetic engineering in Hawaii, which a lot of activist groups tried to do, the papaya farmers said, no, this saved our industry. So this is a really good example for you to lead with, this and the brinjal when we have these discussions, because this wasn't Monsanto, it wasn't Bayer, it wasn't Syngenta. This was academic. This was the USDA. This was our government and academic labs that together created this solution. And it's still in use today. Oh, we talked about BT. Okay, Roundup Ready. This is the other one that is getting a lot of negative play these days. And I really hope you understand this one, and happy to answer your questions.
Every other day, Kevin, I get an email from a law firm saying that they want me to join some kind of class action suit against this clearly cancer-causing product.
Yeah, well, if you do, you might see me there. um, I know the literature on this inside and out, and I've been studying this one for probably almost 40 years. I know what this stuff does, and I understand it. And this is such smoke and mirrors litigation that amazes me that they can actually be winning lawsuits. So they're winning about half of the ones they do, and it all depends on the jury they get. And science isn't dictated by juries. But let me tell you how this works. If you look at a field of soybeans that had some corn in it last year that was not genetically engineered, here's genetically engineered soybean that was treated with an herbicide that kills the corn but leaves the soybean. And that's pretty cool. If you could use an herbicide that would selectively kill weeds but leave the crop, that would be a really good thing. And how do you do that? And so just to get into some chemistry, and I keep this rather simple. What you want are these things at the end. These are amino acids. These are the building blocks of proteins. These are things that are necessary for life. And they're created by this pathway. And this stuff gets converted to this stuff by this enzyme called EPSP synthase. It stands for 3-enolpyruvyl shikimate phosphate synthase. This enzyme does that job. And glyphosate binds it and blocks it. So when you can't produce this, the plants die. What scientists did was they put in an EPSP synthase from bacteria that's a little bit different. So it does exactly the same job, but doesn't care about glyphosate. So the plant one is inhibited, bacterial one is not. It does exactly the same job. So in the presence of the herbicide, which has very, very low toxicity to non-targets, the plant does fine. This plant survives, this one dies. And it's a brilliant technology that caught on extremely quickly. It's in 97% of corn, sugar beets, soybeans, and what am I leaving out? Canola. 90% of the acreage. It's really great technology because as the plants germinate, your seeds germinate and the weeds germinate. After about a week or two, you spray over the top with the herbicide, you kill the weeds, you leave the plants, and the plants grow up and shade out the weeds. It's awesome. And the herbicide is extremely non-toxic. The chronic or the acute dosage in humans is ridiculously high. Something like 5 grams per kilogram. So a gram is about the weight of a nickel, and a kilogram is 2.2 pounds. So if you're 200 pounds, you're about 100 kilograms. You would have to eat 100 nickels to have a 50% chance of dying. 100 nickels weight of the herbicide to have a 50% chance of dying if you were a rat. Very, very non-toxic stuff, and we know exactly how it works, and it has been studied ad nauseum, both in a mechanism level at the level of the chemistry as well as the epidemiological level, and there are no good data that show that it does anything negative. It has any adverse effects in dietary or occupational exposures. You can get adverse effects if you go high doses, but we don't do that. So anyway, what are the negative sides? The negative consequences are that you get resistant weeds. So like antibiotic resistance, where we use an antibiotic too much, we start to see resistance. We use a herbicide too much, we get antibiotic resistant weeds. So this is the major drawback, and something that really matters. This ends in 2012. The new data are ridiculous. I mean, there's tons of resistant weeds that actually make this technology not as good. So that's something else that scientists are looking at. We talked about golden rice. We also have golden cassava. Cassava being a starchy root that feeds 1 billion people a year. It says 250 million, but it's more like 1 billion. They're also making virus-resistant cassava. So these are things that we can do for the developing world that are extremely powerful. Apples in the industrialized world turn brown and are unattractive. They use antisense technology to remove an enzyme called polyphenol oxidase. It's an enzyme that reacts with this compound and oxygen to make a brown color with water. So avocados, bananas, apples, you could make them non-browning, which is a really good thing if you're going to use them in processed foods. So in salads, in cider, in whatever, you can use the non-browning trait to have a more attractive food and get people to eat more fruit, make it last longer. We have lots of things that can develop apple. This example is how we can make apples resistant to apple scab, which is a disease of apples. And wild apples don't get it, but cultivated apples do. And it took about 60 years and millions of dollars to breed the gene from here into here. They did it in the Netherlands with a genetic engineering tweak in 5 years for $5 million. So it just accelerates our ability to solve important problems. I just want to get to the new technology is when we're talking about gene editing. And gene editing, if we look at traditional breeding where we're taking plants, a variety and another variety, and crossing them together genetically, we can affect 40,000 different genes in ways we can't predict. We have no idea how they're affecting each other. We don't know, and nobody really cares. If we do genetic engineering and we add a gene to one spot, one gene of 40,000 is affected, but people hate it. They're protesting this. Gene editing is where we can go into that book in the library and erase one letter and change the meaning. And this is the new technology. This is really what's exciting because the USDA doesn't consider this a regulated item. They say, okay, well, this can occur because of naturally occurring mutations, cosmic rays from from space, potassium 40 decay from the earth. You can get changes in DNA that occur naturally, and so we're not going to regulate that, which is huge because now we've democratized this really great technology, and anybody can use it without the high regulatory barriers. Let's move forward to how this works. This exploits a bacterial immune system. So bacteria have immune systems. They know the viruses they've encountered. Because if a bacterium is a viral infection, it'll save a little snippet of that virus in its own DNA and pass that on to its kids. So it's kind of like having a wanted poster and passing it on to the future generation that says, if this comes along, get rid of it. And so bacteria, when they have that wanted poster in their DNA, this ancient relic sequence that says this is what a virus looks like, they go in and cut that virus apart. They chop it up and the virus dies. So it's a way that bacteria can target viral infections. Well, if bacteria can do that, what if we as scientists could use that same mechanism to cut the gene we want? Going back to the idea that the genetic code is universal. And so that's what we've been able to do. This is that process of CRISPR-Cas9. CRISPR standing for clustered regular interspaced repeats, which doesn't say much about anything. There's an enzyme called Cas9 that's the scissors. It uses a little piece of the RNA that says, here's the sequence of the virus, and go cut the virus. Or the sequence that Folta engineers in, that we're going to go cut that sequence when we find it. And so this has been so powerful because this isn't adding a whole gene. This isn't doing big invasive things in genetic engineering. It's surgically removing a letter from a book in the library of the genome. Really cool. And the literature on this has exploded. Again, an old slide. Everybody does this now. There are people who do this in their garage. I mean, so what do you do with that? Some of the things they've done was they made genetically pulled cattle, and cattle grow horns that are a threat to other cattle. They're a threat to those who handle the cattle. And so can you make cattle that don't grow horns? Well, a Black Angus, no. And so what if you could model the same exact mutation in Black Angus in a dairy cow? And they did it. And here are cows that were produced that don't produce the horn. So that's Dr. Alison Van Eenenum and her technician, Amy, who have made these cows. So by removing that gene, now you don't have horns. When you poll cattle, P-O-L-L cattle, they either have to burn the cells out that lead to the horns or scoop them out. And both are extremely painful, require a veterinarian, require anesthesia. So to have a genetically pulled cow is brilliant, or cattle is brilliant. So this is a breakthrough that we thought would be great, that ended up euthanizing these animals because they couldn't be regulated for actual use on farms. Again, going back to that idea that this is a drug. This is not a drug. This is a drug, one base pair change. Also, could you remove or suppress allergies? And this is another huge one. I talked to somebody today about this, about possibly doing this in apples. Are there ways that we could turn off the proteins or change the proteins that are inducing allergic responses to peanuts or wheat, which are really becoming a larger problem, can be life-threatening. A great example of how this can work. In barley does not get powdery mildew if it has a deficiency in a gene. So this gene, if it has the gene intact, it gets sick. If the gene is disrupted, it's resistant. And that may seem backwards, but think of this as a susceptibility gene. Wheat is susceptible, but wheat doesn't have this lesion or this error that we can breed in, but you can create it with gene editing. And now they've been able to make wheat that is now resistant to powdery mildew and uses mountains of less fungicide. This is a very, very good technology. So I know I just talked about a few examples in the last, whatever it's been, 45 minutes. Where are we going? And this is the problem, is that we still have a lot of pushback. And I spend a lot of my time talking to scientists, farmers, industry folks, enthusiasts, about how to get out there and talk to a public that's concerned in ways that resonate, in ways that make a difference. And so I really encourage you to share these kinds of innovations. talk, these can help people in the developing world. They can help people here, help our environment. And hopefully one of those areas resonates with you too. And I hope that you continue to learn about these things. Reach out to me if I can be of assistance, because I'd love to tell you more about it. The problem we have is that we're up against an online environment of folks who are making money off of disinformation, folks who are spreading fear about food, whether it's seed oils, colors in food. I mean, you've heard it all recently from Robert F. Kennedy Jr., from Food Babe, from all these folks who make a living selling products or by
And
creating.
just so people know, you're not being sexist by calling this woman the food babe. That is
No,
her
that's what she.
own
No,
knowledge.
that's what she calls herself.
Yes. Yes.
No, that's what she calls herself.
Yeah.
And it's a long story. I've had a long history with her. But these are folks who make a living off of spreading misinformation. And so this is what we're up against, is how do we have beautiful solutions that can help folks in the developing world, help people here, when there's so many others who are creating fear and uncertainty and doubt that resonates with folks in the middle of the curve who don't know what to believe.
And getting into our government. The food babe was sitting behind RFK Jr. at the hearings.
That's right. She went away for about 5 years and now she's back. And in late September, there was a big meeting that was called in up on Capitol Hill with the Senate. A Senate Select Committee spent a day listening to folks like the Food Babe, Vani Hari, with RFK Jr., with others who are all selling something online and are not experts in their field. Yet they get a audience with the Senate around the issues of food and farming. And if you read online, it basically says farmers are trying to kill you, that food companies are trying to kill you. It's everywhere. One of my favorite websites is Bioengineered Food Awareness. Excuse me. Still getting rid of coffee. The Bioengineered Food Awareness, this website does nothing but disparage food and food technology and farming. And even things that aren't bioengineered, they go after. My apple had wax on it, and so it's full of pesticide. But they create fear, uncertainty, and doubt. This is old. It's probably about 1 million members, and the admins are out of Morocco. And it really led me to the hypothesis that if you really wanted to cause trouble in the United States of America and you were a hostile entity, you wouldn't try to shoot missiles or fly planes. What you do is you get the public upset about medicine and food and get it to not trust its own institutions and get it to not trust farmers. And that's a playbook that's been used many times through history. And something that I fear a lot and something I work very hard to push back against. It's really awful to see how much, when we live in a time of such abundance and such food safety, particularly after having been to areas of such profound food insecurity and slums where people were essentially starving, that we have so much yet are complaining so much about how dangerous it is when there's no risk, no added risk. This is just kind of an idea what we see on that page. What do eating bioengineered foods do to our immune system? I mean, when you read what they, of course, I go on there and say, it does nothing to your immune system, not bioengineered, contains it. I go and I'm friendly, I'm happy, and I give the voice of reason. They frequently will block me from posting, but I keep doing it. Bill Gates is the central player there. Everybody thinks Bill Gates is that bioengineering is Bill Gates' solution to population control. And farmers are complicit in killing people with their food, which is a really lousy business model to kill the people that buy the stuff you sell.
And Bill Gates got his hand on a lot of things. He's also responsible for putting, little chips or something in the COVID vaccines for some
That's
reason.
right. Yeah, Bill is really a busy guy, and then probably the chemtrails too.
Yeah, probably.
So, so I went through a bunch of examples. We didn't talk much about human biology, but here's Victoria Gray, who was the first person to receive genetically engineered stem cells that cured her sickle cell disease. And that's something that is coming fast and furious, potentially. A number of companies have solutions for that by gene editing, by changing that one base to turn on a different kind of hemoglobin. It's an amazing story. But these are the kinds of things that are coming if we have the courage to let them. And my biggest fear is that in an affluent nation where 50% of the country thinks that the food is killing them and that medicine is out to get them and that the CDC is full of liars and charlatans, will we actually see these breakthroughs? And it's something that genuinely concerns me. And that's why I appreciate invitations like this and any other ones I get, because we have to change it. And we have to change the culture around food and farming and get people excited about it, and also get people willing to step in and address disinformation when it occurs. And I've made a career of that because all these things are important to me. I care about the food insecure and farmers and industrialized world consumer and the environment. And that's what I'm doing every day. And in order to do that, technology is a big part of it. It's not the solution, but it's part of a solution. The big problem is that we're not able to use it because in its entirety, because of pushback. And so I'll stop there. I do a podcast every week called Talking Biotech. I've been doing it now 10 years. First one I did was in 2015 after I was on with Joe Rogan. And he said, "You should do a podcast." I said, "Sure, I should." Okay, so go do it. And here we are 10 years later, still just about every week putting one up. So if you'd like to know about any of these topics, it's not just biotech. It's a lot about food and farming and where food comes from. It's something in there for everyone. Lots of stuff on medicine, new breakthroughs. So take a peek and reach out to me anytime if you have questions. I'm always glad to answer them. So why don't I stop there? And I don't know how much time I use, but if we can stop there for a second, I can answer any questions.
That was
Yes.
perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and yeah, that was really helpful. Thanks for sharing all of that. Something I noticed in a lot of the examples you were giving was that a lot of these engineered solutions are solving problems that have to do with things that are happening to the farmers, to the crops, to the livestock, that people who are maybe in an industrialized country who are used to going to the grocery store and buying their food in a package are completely unaware of. And it sounds like people are becoming really susceptible to the arguments against these solutions because for some reason those are very accessible online, but they're not understanding what the actual risks and threats are that these solutions are trying to solve. What do we how do we manage that situation? And I'm sort of
Yeah, so you
first question, but
yeah, you asked an excellent question. So this is the reason we have a problem, is because the seed companies that made these technologies back in the 1980s and 90s, their customer was the farmer. And they said the farmer will use a cheap, safe herbicide, and they won't have to spray insecticides. They're going to love this. And farmers did. But at the same time, the internet was growing and chat boards and websites that were dominated by the folks who didn't like the chemical companies that now became seed companies. And I totally get that. You know, I mean, these were companies like Monsanto and others that did like really awful stuff back in the 1900s, like super fun sites and really, really bad environmental stewards. So people didn't like that they were selling seeds. So the companies were selling to the farmers, and that's where their advertising and information went. Consumers, they got all their information from online from an anti-GMO industry. And so that's why we lost this argument. And then academics were awful in stepping into this discussion because we said, we'll tell you how to think about this. Don't worry about those websites. And that's where we lost.
And it doesn't help when I hate when I go to the grocery store and I'm looking for one specific product, and maybe there's three brands of it, and all of the brands say proudly created with non-GMO products, and I know there are no version of this that has GMO products
That's
that
right.
that is GMO created. They just put that on there because they know people don't like the GMO words, and therefore, ooh, I'm going to buy this because you're telling me it's got no GMO. I'm waiting to see that on a bottle of water. No GMOs in this bottle of water.
It's been done. I have pictures.
wow.
My favorite one is non-GMO vodka.
Vodka contains 40% of it is a class 1 carcinogen called
Yeah.
ethanol. And you're worried about the plant it came from, which had an extra gene that makes it use less pesticide.
Yeah, I'm thinking primarily about my health when I'm consuming migraine alcohol. I don't know what you people are doing, but oh man. Okay, well, this has been fascinating, and we have a ton of questions for you. But first, should we review the results from our poll questions?
Yes, please.
Okay, let's see. Oh, I love it. Apparently it sounded like I said migraine alcohol. I meant my grain alcohol, but I see how that sounded that way,
Yeah,
so.
I did hear that too, but I figured what you meant because I
Love it.
had never heard of
Okay,
anything of migraine alcohol.
migraine alcohol. That
Oh,
sounds
that's
horrible.
I know it's difficult to cure migraines, but I've never heard of alcohol doing it.
Me either. I do not recommend that. I am not a medical doctor though, so follow the advice of your clinician. Okay, let's look at our poll results and see what we got here. So at the beginning of the show, before we heard the talk, here was what we asked. We first asked, do you believe that your food, if eaten in moderation, presents health risks? The most people selected the second choice. 44% of people selected yes, ultra processed food consumption may lead to health consequences. 31% of people picked maybe, food is overall safe, but diets are the problem. And a few people picked from the other choices, 15% of which selected we should be grateful for the safest food supply in human history. Now, Kevin, what would you say is the best answer choice out of these options?
That's a tough one to say because really the middle three are really good answers. I personally feel that we should be that they all kind of fit. We should be grateful for the safest food supply in human history. The major problem we have from food, major risk, is from food poisoning. That something that is improperly cooked or improperly handled or left out too long. That's the major risk from food, not its genetics, not the pesticides that might travel along in minute amounts. The idea of ultra processed foods being dangerous ties in with the idea of bad diets. Everything you buy, even the most processed food, say Pringles potato chips, right? I mean, it's potato goo that's smashed into a chip form. Those are safe, but if you eat too much of it, it probably isn't necessarily the best thing for you in terms of the amount of salt and other stuff that's in there, sugar, other stuff that's in there. So yeah, we have great food, bad diets. We make bad choices, and too much of a bad thing. We're sedentary. And so when I hear folks like RFK Jr. and the Food Babe talking about, we have red dye number 3, that's the problem of everything. It's not. It's that we're sedentary culture. We don't get enough exercise. We get too much stress, not enough sleep, and we're not eating enough of the right stuff. I mean, only 30% of adults get enough fruits and vegetables in a daily serving. So those are the major problems.
Okay, good to know. I knew you had given us great nuanced answer choices here. I love it.
Yeah, it's a professor thing.
Oh, I know it is. Okay, so the second question was, how concerned are you about genetically engineered foods or GMOs? And we had 10% of people are very concerned about adding GMOs to foods. 21% of people said they avoid bioengineered ingredients but don't know of any evidence of harm. The most people, 51%, said no, I'm not worried about this, and 18% of people were not sure. Now, that's actually a pretty large amount in those last two categories, more than I was expecting. How does that line up with your usual experience in this?
I think that's pretty typical. I think the disinformation uh, ecosystem is so strong that people just aren't sure and they don't know all the details. And it is an incredibly complicated and nuanced field. But
Mhm.
the bottom line is, in terms of health risks, these are things that have been in the human diet, have been contributing to the human diet since 1995. And in that time, there has not been one single confirmed case of harm or allergy from ingredients from a plant, genetically engineered plant. And one of the most important nuances, and you're going to love this, when people say genetically engineered food, there's nothing in your food that's genetically engineered, unless you're eating the papaya. The corn, sugar beets, soybeans, canola, those are the four big ones. They're used to make the oils. They're used to make cooking oils. They're used to make starch. They're used to make high fructose corn syrup, or in the case of sugar beets, sucrose, regular table sugar. So they make the ingredients from a plant that's genetically engineered. The factory is engineered, not the product. The products are identical to those from non-genetically engineered plants. So sugar from a sugar beet, GMO sugar beet, is identical to a non-GMO sugar beet, is identical to an organic sugar beet. It's identical. And so the idea that there's some magical risk that comes along with it has been exploited by many and gets people to pay more for an equivalent product. So there's no health risk that is elevated above traditional breeding or any other way in which things are genetically improved.
Good to know. Okay. And we've still got more questions coming in. So I'll try and rush through these next couple of questions, or poll questions. We can get to it, or others. But let's see. We asked people, when choosing food at the grocery store, select the best option. And this was one where people were actually able to choose more than one option. So we might have more than 100% here. But most people, 53%, said, actually, I do not choose organic food. Results were split among those who do select organic food because it's either better for the environment, safer, or it tastes better. And then 16% of people selected none of the above.
Did this one allow people to choose more than one option? I forgot if you did that.
It did, yes. However, it looks like we have ended at close to 100% anyway. But nevertheless, 53% said they don't choose organic food. Now, how does that fit into this conversation?
Yeah, this comes up all the time, and primarily because a lot of the anti-GMO noise is really made by entities associated with the organic industry. And I say organic industry because there's a lot of people who make a lot of money selling something they call organic. Organic is a production technique, and it's essentially barring the use of specific chemistries that are synthetic. So I can't use a targeted insecticide or fungicide that deals with a certain type of physiology on an insect or fungus, but I can use a natural poison that does something similar. So organic simply means that you're using non-genetically engineered seeds, which basically very few things are. It's only corn, soy, canola, sugar beets, and then the Hawaiian papaya and some acreage of zucchini, a little bit of potatoes, a little bit of apples. In general, nothing in your produce aisle is genetically engineered. So that's always a surprise to people. So organic basically says you can't use the genetically engineered stuff, but you have to use natural fertilizers. So composts, fish emulsion, other kinds of biological goo, but you can't use
all stuff that can carry infections, by the way.
That is true. One of the saddest things and I work with organic farmers as well as conventional, and I love organic farmers. They do a great job with one hand tied behind their back. Respect goes out to them. But I went to one farm and they just had put down fish emulsion on tomatoes, and they had tomatoes on steaks, and they had all these birds, including some big turkey vultures, sitting on the steaks, pooping on the tomatoes. And it's to say, yeah, you're going backwards here in terms of safety. But it basically means that you can only use naturally occurring poisons. And that said, organic and conventional produce is safe, and that the chemistries that are used sparingly and in tiny amounts that are monitored, and we know how much is there. And I would have no qualms in consuming anything. I eat strawberries right out of the field. I'd give them to my daughter.
So you addressed the safety issue. Address the taste better and better for the environment, please.
The taste issue doesn't matter so much because fruits and vegetables are dependent upon their environment, on how they're fertilized, how much water they're given, all kinds of other factors. The genetics of the the plant itself. So flavors and aromas, it depends. You can have some beautiful organic produce that comes from the farmer down the street who's an organic farmer because the stuff was picked yesterday and didn't sit on a shelf for 3 weeks. I would encourage people to eat what they can support a local farm. That's great. I own one. I'm on one with my wife. Support your local farmers. Go to farmers markets. Buy what's been picked most recently, so it lasts longer for you. Whether it's organic or conventional, doesn't matter.
Yeah, I want to address what we talked in the pre-show. Penn and Teller's series on Showtime, I think, or HBO, Bullshit, covered this organic thing amazingly, and
Yeah.
they actually did many tests with the public to see about what they thought about organic versus standard food. And in one example, they had standard bananas, which they cut in half and put half of the banana on a plate that said organic, and the other half of the same banana on a plate that said standard banana. And then they had people do a taste test, and almost every single person thought the organic half tasted better. It was the same banana, people. This is in your minds mostly. And you're paying extra money freaking for it. I get so annoyed when I go and I want to buy strawberries, and there's like $2 more a pound for strawberries, and I know there is no difference.
Yeah, it carries a halo, and we know that, and consumers know that. And nowadays, a lot of the stuff that shows up as organic is made by the same companies that make conventional. They just dedicate 20% of their acreage to organic cultivation. So you're not really doing anything to defeat the big companies. I mean, still Coke and Pepsi and Mondelez and all those places that are doing this. They're just generating some under organic certification.
All right, that was another thing. They took surveys of the people in those episodes, the bullshit episode about organic farming, and everybody thought I'm going to help the little farmer, and that's why I'm buying organic.
Yeah. Now, but you can, if you it's better to help a small farmer rather than just an organic farmer. And then for the environment, that's a real debatable one that came up a second ago. Rob asked about that. If you go by an organic farm that's controlling a bacterial outbreak, they're spraying with 4, 5, 7, 10 pounds of copper sulfate per acre. You can use copper because it's natural, yet it's a heavy metal, and it's not good for your soil. It's not good for your land. It's not good for the water around it. The water that comes off the fruits and vegetables that are grown on it is treated as hazardous waste. So it isn't necessarily better for the environment. It might be, but it's one of these things that we have to look at each thing on a case by case basis.
Isn't the other thing that it generally takes more land to grow the same volume of organic crops? And that's great if we had food aplenty in the world, but the problem is, as you started the conversation, we don't have that situation.
Yeah, it takes more land and it takes more labor. The yields are lower and they're harder to get. And so it takes more energy from more people, which, right now labor is shortage. That's why it costs more. It costs more because it is much harder to produce. And
And it seems to me by putting your money there, you think you're doing a good thing, you're buying food that tastes better or whatever, you're actually giving incentive to those big companies for making more of that type of food as opposed to the just as safe and just as good tasting and not so useful, wasteful of the amount of land that needs to be done. You're voting essentially with your pocketbook, and you're saying, yeah, I like this idea.
and everybody likes the idea of using, methods they think are more sustainable. We're all on the same page there. The trick is to sit back and say, what is truly more sustainable? Is it to have a plant that protects itself or a plant that we have to apply the stuff? And the BT corn that protects itself versus having somebody walk around the field spraying BT that rinses off when it rains and has to be reapplied. Costs $45 for a 20-pound bag. This is why it costs more to do it that way.
Good to
I
know.
think genetic engineering would be the best thing in the world for organic growers because they wouldn't have to apply chemistry.
Well, there you have it. Let's get to a couple of questions. Oh, and last thing, most people, when asked what fictional character they would choose to be if they had to eat a superfood to give them powers, 46% of people chose Popeye. So we are some spinach fans here at RFRX this evening. And We've got time for a couple of more questions, so let's see if we can rapid fire some. This has been fascinating, and people are still coming in with their questions. You were right. This is a topic that people want to know more about, and we don't know a lot about, so bear with us. We've got someone asking, oh, and this is something I've been wondering about too. What about lab produced meat? Do you know about that? And is it safe? Do we know enough about it to decide if it's safe? And I'm going to add a piece to this question. How can people know? If I, the consumer, want to know if something like that is safe, what should I do to find out accurately?
Yeah, so the lab produced meats are very different from what's being done at the large scale manufacturer level, like the Beyond Burgers and all this stuff. That's all made with proteins that are developed in fermenters, all perfectly safe. They're just proteins. They're just proteins like any other proteins. There's nothing magical about them. And just that they give the mouthfeel and the sensation of actually consuming meat. So very safe. And I think the idea of so are they palatable? Are they better than meat? Who knows? Um, I was a vegetarian for 16 years and I really like those things, bean burgers and things. But they're not making filet mignons and ribeyes. They're making hot dogs and hamburgers because you can't really substitute for the real thing. So
I think maybe that question was because I've been a vegetarian for 20 years, is the meat lab grown meat that's actually using animal proteins?
yeah.
That one, yes. If I don't know who asked that question if they wanted to clarify, but I think that's the specific kind of not meat alternatives, but meat grown in a lab that's made from animal proteins.
Yeah. So I guess that's a funny gray area, isn't it? That I know that folks in Islam have said that that's perfectly acceptable to use an animal gene or in animal cells to make a product you'd consume. Others have said no. So it kind of depends on where you're coming from. If the idea is animal welfare, if you can grow animal parts or animal tissue in a petri dish, does that spare animals or does that make them not necessary in the first place? And so those are the kind of ethical sides of that you have to wrestle with. And I'm not sure how I think about that yet. I'm still thinking about it.
Oh, okay. Good to know. All right. What else, Rob?
Oh, we have so many. Are you going to be able to stick around after this talk for hangout? What's your schedule like,
I
Kevin?
can stick around for a little bit. My daughter's been super quiet this whole time.
She's been
And she's I should bring her over. She's doing great, but I probably have to change a diaper or something like that. So just for the broader audience, I'm an old dad. I became a dad at 56. I had a second kid recently, and he's in the NICU, and my wife is there taking care of him. So I'm home with the other one 24 hours a day. So I can stick around as long as she lets me.
fair
Okay.
enough. Okay, well, let's do another question, Rob, and then we can wrap up and go to hangout and just keep picking your brain and until you're ready to log off. How about that?
No, I'll be
Okay.
brief. I'll keep it brief.
Okay, so let's see. Picking at random. I think this is like one of the most sets of questions we've ever had, actually. It's hard to go through all these. Are the proteins the GMO plants creating that kill insects that eat them going to kill off the insect species? Or make the crop plants so predator resistant that they just become invasive while native plants remain preyed upon? I'm not sure I
Ooh,
understood that question.
no, cool idea. And so these are extremely selective. The ones these are called cry proteins for crystal. You also see them online under delta endotoxin. So when you look these up, you can use those terms to learn more. These are proteins that specifically adhere to a specific receptor in the gut of a given insect. So the ones on corn are targeting the pests of corn, these larval insects, and only in the larval stage. And so they target a receptor in the stomach that's like a lock and key mechanism that it doesn't affect bees. It barely affects bees. It doesn't affect beetles. It doesn't affect any other insect. These are selective. That's specific. That's what's so cool about them. So so that part of your question is it actually adds to the biodiversity of farm fields, because the only things that get removed are the things that feed on the plant. You don't have to fly a spray plane over and kill everything.
Okay, and so then I guess the second part of that was would that make the plants so, fantastically able to spread with no resistance that they become invasive?
No, they're still farm plants. They're still the wimpiest things out there. They can't compete with weeds. Um,
Okay.
yeah, they're still, unless we do something, they're goners.
Okay, and this one's kind of connected. Will the Bt protein that kills the insects that eat the crops also hurt animals that eat the insects? In other words, if Bt protein kills aphids, will it hurt ladybugs and birds that eat the aphids?
No, there's no BT against aphids. It's all the only thing that BT is against is beetles and beetles and moth larvae and some mosquitoes. There's a BT against that. But in general, the BTs are very specific, very selective.
Cool.
So they are unlikely to affect non-target species.
If spiders eat the beetles, will it hurt the spiders? I'm asking for a friend who doesn't like spiders.
Not at all. No, sorry.
Blast. Okay. I mean, yay.
Yeah, we need spiders.
You keep saying that. Okay. Well, let's press on here. Let's wrap up and go to the hangout, and then we can keep asking. We have so many questions. This is, I think Rob is right. This is the most questions we've had in a while. Let's just see how many we can get through before Kevin is pulled away. So okay, moving to the hangout. Let's wrap up. Thanks everyone for coming and making this possible. Don't forget to join us next week, same time, same channel. We have Melanie Tracek King joining us to talk about the misinformation trap and changing minds, my journey from creationist to biologist, which I cannot wait for. I believe Melanie had one of our most watched episodes last year with her previous talk.
Yes, she did. It was right up there. I actually texted her a screenshot of your presentation on that.
Yeah, that was great. That was so much fun. We had my little stuffed what's his name? Woolly Mammoth made an appearance in that episode, maybe.
Yeah, because of her rider analogy, her elephant
Yes.
rider. Yes.
Yes. Okay, so join us next week for that. And don't forget to follow us on social media. I'm going to drop in the chat our links. We have a link tree with everything. That's always the most up to date, but we're also on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, if that's still going on, Blue Sky, and of course, YouTube to check out our previous episodes. They're all up there. And finally, how else can people get involved, Rob?
Yes. So if they have the time and inclination, they can volunteer for this organization. We've learned that healing can come from helping other people. RFR volunteers find meaning and purpose by volunteering with us. All of the services are supported by our staff of volunteers. And we're always in need of more people. There are all sorts of jobs besides the ones working the helplines, which is the thing you always hear about on, call-in shows when they say, hey, you can call RFR about that. We need people to find and vet and post good resources for our clients to use, to host their support groups, to moderate the OC channels, which I mentioned before, even to do IT support. All of the software we use is designed in-house and constantly being improved to make it better for the agents and the clients. And to apply to be a volunteer, you can fill out the form on our main page. It's at the top. Click the link that says volunteer. Also, we have a 3-minute video on the main page called RFR What We Do, and you can just Google that in I would say YouTube, or we put the link if you're here live watching this in the chat right now, and you could send that to people who are in your life and you might think may be needed of our services. It's a good description of everything we do.
Great. And with that, let's hand it over to Dr. Ray to wrap us up with our benediction before the hangout.
Kevin, thanks so much for coming. This was really cool, interesting. You really got a lot of engagement from our folks, so that's cool. We get a lot of great talks here, but we rarely get someone as close to the science as you are. That's fun, and actually, I feel we're really privileged to get you to come here. So, thanks a lot, Garrett. We might need to get Kevin back if he's available, because this is just too too much fun. Hey, I have a tip for you, Kevin, as a parent. My kids are in their my daughter turns 50 soon, but when things were too quiet in my house, it means there was a conspiracy going on. You better go check them out. They're doing something. So just a tip for when they get a little bit older.
Is she an eye shot?
Oh yeah, she's right here. Yeah,
Okay, okay,
Good.
good.
you're exact.
Good.
I know when things are too quiet, there's something wrong.
Yeah. I grew up in a house of 4 boys, and if it got quiet, my mom knew there was a revolution going or something. Anyway, you've been doing podcasts for 10 years. My hat is off to you. I know how hard that is. So congratulations. And I didn't even know about it. I'm gonna have to get on there and look at your thing. Also, this misinformation around food came to me when I was a real little kid, when my granny absolutely refused to eat sugar beet sugar because that wasn't real sugar and it didn't taste as good as pure cane sugar from Hawaii. Do you remember that? Do you remember that commercial?
NH from Hawaii.
Yep. Yeah. CNH from Hawaii. She absolutely swore that sugar beet sugar tasted different and wasn't as good as Hawaiian sugar. I was so.
Less DDT on it. That was the big thing.
Oh, was that what it was?
Yeah. No, Hawaii was lots of DDT at the time.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's why it tasted